Nobody on planet Earth was born to live forever. I don't know if our ancestors who lived so many million years ago were aware of this, but we certainly are, and everybody in this room and elsewhere on planet Earth know that their time is limited. And yet we go about our life as if we have dreams and plans, as if time were unlimited. As a historian, it's interesting and important for me to point this out to you. Do I have to point this? Okay. The first asset that you have in life is time present. Whatever you can do, you can only do now, and by tomorrow nobody knows. The world can end, any of us could end. The second asset, as a historian, I believe, is the time that is past, in which our ancestors and forefathers used their time to produce something creative and wonderful, which is part of the world heritage. India is a very unique country. It is the only living civilization of the whole world. The Greeks, the Romans, the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, everybody, even the Chinese, destroyed themselves in some manner or the other. But India goes on and on. Its society is designed for continuity and not for change. That is one aspect. But that is what gives India the problem in the context of architecture, because we are so busy living the present and obsessed by it that we forget to look at our past. It's only civilizations which are dying, which are obsessed by putting their past into museums. But India is happy to go on with the present and propel itself forward. Here is a picture that would interest you. This is just a daily scene on the street of Ujjain. A holy man is being carried in procession. He would have been on an elephant in some other time, but because they didn't have an elephant, they put him on top of an ambassador car. And other sadhus are actually, venerating him, and the procession goes on. Any of you could, on your way to work in any city of India, see a sight like this and not be perturbed and stop and say that this is a Fellini film or it's a set. Because India has that continuity and the power to adapt itself and its traditions and propel them forward however it manages. Talking about this, I was creating a background or a foundation for the subject of an architectural talk. And I'll take just a minute more to introduce you to my beginnings and to an extraordinary person who has been my partner in the process of what I have done, and I shall show you. My father was an industrialist, and by some magic of home industry, he got my mother to produce me along with a twin brother. But the only problem was that he didn't look like me, so it served no real purpose. He couldn't play any mischief or prank on anybody. But after I finished my master's in history and I was working in advertising, I had the chance to meet Francis Waxia, a young man, who resembled my unidentical twin. And when I told him that he looked like my twin brother, he thought I was actually joking. But in this, I thought that there was a message of destiny, that here you meet somebody who resembles your twin, and he could be as different as anybody could be from me. Francis is born of a Turkish mother and a Polish father with French passports on a German ship in Portuguese possession in the Cuban waters. And after having lived in a few countries, he naturally arrives in India, which is, I think, the only country which could assimilate such a diverse background. And then we set about to do what we do. The first thing we did was to write a book on Shekhawati. Shekhawati is a region of Rajasthan from where all the wealthiest Marwaris come. And it's very humbling to see what the richest community of India has built for itself as their own homes. I'll just show you a few pictures quickly. This is an aerial view of one of the towns of Shekhawati. Because you need to have a different eye to see your own country, the point I was making from that photograph I showed you. Francis was a Westerner who was Indianized, and I, at best, was an Indian who was Westernized. So I think that we had a common point of meeting, and we could see India with that difference. So when we saw Shekhawati and its amazing Havelis, which had been there from the beginning of the 19th century, it is over 150 years, and nobody had noticed them, we did a book on the subject. This is the Haveli of Kumara Mangalam Birla by direct descent. You see how huge it is, because they made disproportionate wealth in the 19th century by trading. This is an aerial view of its courtyard. And you see frescoes painted on it. So we did this book, which came out in the UK. These are amazing temples and chhatris of the Podars. All the big names, Goikar, Podars, Somanis, all come from this region. We restored the Piramal Haveli, which became a wonderful place where people will actually stay, because there's no place you could stay in this desert before that. We got Ikrom, Sir Bernard Phelan, which are big names in restoration, to come from Rome, England, held a seminar, and from 1977 till 1984, we spent all our energy telling the Marwaris about their extraordinary heritage, about their Havelis, which are painted from gateways to ceiling to courtyards to the other side of the courtyard. And this was the offices of the Marwaris. But we soon realized, even after we lectured to architectural students, to cities like Bombay and Calcutta, where a lot of Marwaris lived, that talking is not what was going to do what we had to do. I think that our book, which ended with a very interesting quote, then became the pointer for our lives. The quote said, in the early 17th century, there was a Dutch traveler who came to the court of Jahangir, and he said the entrance to every city and town in India is strewn with ruins. Because everyone in India wants to build in their own name. They forget that their work will also fall to the same fate. If you don't look after what your father and grandfather had built, why will your children look after what you're going to build? So when this became the pointer, we realized then rather than try to build the Taj Mahal, which took 10 years, a wealthy monarch, or attempt something like Ellora, which took 800 years to chip 400 tons of stone from the top of a mountain downwards and create an absolute marvel, that one could be equally useful on planet Earth by looking after the works of others, the extraordinary buildings that people have built. This involves unlisted buildings. You and I cannot, for example, start to restore the Taj Mahal, which is a listed building, or the Red Fort, but we took on the unlisted building. If you see the condition of this Haveli and how it's soon going to rot, or this one with huge chunks of the fresco falling away, we realized that the only way was to do our own thing. This is a dictum that could serve anybody well. Gandhiji said, "Find purpose and the means will follow." If he had set about to get rid of empire by trying to raise the means, the funds, the army, the work, he would never have succeeded. But he had an extraordinary mechanism by which he did succeed. So we started by restoring a small Haveli in Haryana, an 18th century building, which is very beautiful now. And as soon as it was restored, it took a year and a half and not much fun. It appeared in Architectural Digest, in other design magazines and abroad in India, and everybody who was interested in design and society started to visit it and wanted to visit it. There were two kinds of people, those who had been to this Haveli and those who hadn't. And then we realized that perhaps there was something bigger we needed to do. So we then acquired the Neemrana Fort Palace, which is a 15th century ruin halfway between Delhi and Jaipur. An extraordinary ruin built by the descendants of the Chauhans. For 40 years it had been on the market, and you can see the condition of ruin that it was. And in 5 years it was ready. The front part of it, the part which is marked on the photograph, is the part, if you go back to this and see, is the same part as this, was restored, and guests started to arrive. Now the purpose of this, and I shall show you some more pictures to see how daunting it was. If you look at this, on the right hand side you see a blank hill, and all this construction that you actually see is what we raised because the building had fallen down. And then we built on the hill, because India is a continuous living civilization. We still have the masons and the materials to do exactly what was done 550 years ago. And if you walk deep into the fort, there are rooms like this in which you have large rocks. This Aravalli rock mountain is 2 billion years old. And to make it livable, there are swimming pools and spas and so on. It's become a heritage hotel. So from this arose a term called Nimranification, which is a non-purist form of restoration of unlisted buildings, that which we can, as citizens of India, buy and touch. The important aspects of this restoration is that it involves restoration, rebuilding, or you can call it revitalization of a building, but the end use is changed. You could, for example, have an old kitchen in a fort, which could then become a discotheque. There's no purity that you have to make that into a kitchen, because modern kitchens are very different. But the most important thing is that it should have a self-sustaining cycle. It must earn money to look after its maintenance, because it is out of sync with the times. The people who lived in it were actually using it for very different purpose. A fort, for example, is built to keep people out, so we had to redesign it to welcome people in. And in that redesigning, what you call Neemranification, we made the process viable for people to pay for it, and for it to look after itself, and for other projects to happen with the same funds. So with the courage and the backing of what we had already done, we have restored some 30 buildings in 30 years, which is by private enterprise. This is a 400-year-old Danish building on the coast of Tamil Nadu. The Danes came before the British. They bought a small piece of land from the Maharaja of Thanjavur to trade in pepper, which they used for saving their meats during the winter. And if you look at the before and after picture, you see that nobody would have imagined that a place so extraordinary could come out of a ruin. This is a 14th century Pandya temple, which you see from the bungalow on the beach. And this is how it is today. You see it from the veranda, which had been blown off in tsunamis, the interiors. So it becomes a Danish interior of the 17th century. We restored a French building, which was listed for demolition in Pondicherry. It won an UNESCO award. But the award is not the issue. The real reward comes from the karma itself. In India, we understand the concept of a karma yogi. You work because you must, and the joy of the work is actually the reward. This is a Tamil colonial building also, with before and after pictures. The purpose is just to show you a spectrum, not bore you with too many pictures. But without seeing the pictures, you couldn't travel to all these places and imagine what I was talking about. This is in Punjab, the Baradari Palace, where the Maharaja lived on the top floor with 3 wives, one Sikh, one Muslim, and one Christian. And the portico leads to a wonderful garden. The bedrooms are 20 feet high. This is an English building built by Captain Barr in Matheran, which is near Bombay. It has a 150-foot long veranda. The roofs that have blown off, everything was eaten by white ants. So it's easier to do a building. And where would you be able to have a banquet, but in a place which has a 30-foot high ceiling? Nobody builds that kind of building these days. Or sit in a veranda and look at the mountains. The important thing also to remember, being Indian, is that it is always the fakir who wins against the royalty. Luxury, if you look at it, is actually a transient thing. It's about people who are still on their way to arriving somewhere. If you look at history, look at Versailles, look at the French. The end of Versailles was Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI being guillotined, because they lived with something to excess. The British royalty, for example, being more austere and less flamboyant, have survived. And I think there's a huge lesson for India to learn, because Gandhi, Mother Teresa are names that stand out for their fakirdom. Saving our mission saving our heritage remains a mission. And my purpose of showing you this is that if all of us were able in some way to restore a ruin which was near us, then only will it become a movement. Then only can India, which is such a huge country, strewn with ruins all over, become that extraordinary place where the world could come to admire its heritage. Let's look at France. This is the last example that we're currently working on. I'll show you how amazing the hanging gardens of Tijara are in a place which was absolutely ruined. But if you look at France, as I'm saying, their population is about 60 million and they receive 82 million tourists, which is a staggering discovery. So if we were to restore all of us together for whatever purpose, whether it's tourism, whether it's to put it to use as a public building, whether the government was to use it for its offices, we would have such an extraordinary heritage that if we were to attempt to receive over a billion plus tourists, that would bring India great development, regional development in far-flung places where nobody would expect anything could come. People would be able to live in their villages and not have to migrate. And the exchequer, the national exchequer, would be so happy. So rather than wait for something to happen, here is a quotation from a friend who's written a wonderful book which says, marginalized people, and I count myself in that, as people who do things unaided by society or by the state, often achieve as individuals what they cannot achieve as a group. I think having done whatever one has done, it's very important to remember that whatever you say in India and its exact opposite are both true. Therefore, whatever you do can always be seen from another perspective. To make this point to you, if I was to say to you that we are a very rich country, I would immediately have to say we are a very poor country. We can have the 10th largest number of billionaires, but we still have 700 million poor. So if we were to say that India is a wise country, which it is, we would also have to say how foolish we are. If you look at the newspapers every day, we would say we are a non-violent country, but being so violent. So whatever we do in India, this work that I have done about restoration, the slums of Brexia, also has a flip side. You can also ask, is this a priority for India? But India should have many parallel priorities. It is not a country that can just be involved with food and shelter and forget everything, so by the time they wake up, the rest of India will be in ruin. So that's all. Thank you.